Okay, so I've been plugging away at this for a little while, and I reckon it's time for an origin story. So strap yourselves in. This is how I came to cycling. Okay, so firstly, I'd like to address the fact that what we're going through today is pretty heavy, and we're going to be dealing with things like alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and depression. So if any of these are triggers for you, then you may want to consider turning the video off at this point, or maybe you might feel like you'll get something out of this. So
we interrupt this program for a special news bulletin.
Okay, so some of the stuff I've realised could be potentially compromising, and I don't want that to cause problems, so we're going to use some euphemisms here. So when a certain something is mentioned, instead you will hear this soundbite.
I like to party.
Back to the video. My journey, like most, starts with my parents, and the earliest memories that I have of cycling actually going around Canberra on the back of my dad's bike. And I think I have memories of this because of this photo. But my parents loved cycling. We used to spend a lot of time down in Canberra going around as a family and just spending time together riding bikes for the love of it. So this continued as a kid, and my second oldest memory is this one section in Gannon's Park that had a cycling track that went around the entire part, and on one section it would bank up a hill. And so with training wheels, if you would ride along this section, your bike would tip at an angle that you could not counterbalance, and you would fall down this hill. And as kids, we would always try and ride as fast as we could to get through this section, because in our heads, if you went fast enough, you would not fall. And it never worked, and we always ended up rolling down, and there was one specific telegraph pole that we made a few connections with. So thank goodness for mandatory bike laws in Australia. But anyway, so the love of cycling stayed with me until I was about 10 years old, and I really then started to embrace it. I'd spent all of my money on this Repco Legend, and it was this electric blue mountain bike, and it was just, it was a piece. Anyway, so I would ride this around the neighbourhood non-stop, always around the local area, investigating new routes, riding around Gannon's Park, just finding the freedom that you get as a 10-year-old when you have a bike that has gears and that has something other than back pedal brake. And I just discovered the world. And to me, the world was Peakhurst Heights, which is where I live. But anyway, it was freaking awesome. And it was so good that I even went and bought a little cycling computer with one of those magnets that you would put on the wheel and another one on your fork. And you'd tell it the circumference of your wheel. And every time the magnet went past, it would know how fast you were going. And I would compare my speeds going around tracks. And I was just nuts for it. And I went up to my mum and I said, "Mum, I want to do something with this cycling. I love it." And she said, "Well, why don't you join St. George Cycling Club?" And she showed me an ad in the newspaper for their track meet at Hurstville Oval. And I chickened out because for the first time ever, I was embarrassed about the bike that I had. And this was a trend that would continue. So I moved into high school after that, and just back on that, a little part of me always reflects on that moment and wonders what could have happened if a 12-year-old Aidan Burgess had gone to that track meet. Who would I be? Would I be Caleb Ewan? Probably not. Anyway, so when I went to high school, a mate of mine told me that Repco stands for Rest Assured Every Part Comes Off. Now, aside from the fact that this acronym doesn't actually spell Repco, it made me super embarrassed about the bike that I had. And I didn't touch it. Again, the bike went into the garage and I never rode that bike again. It just went on a council cleanup. Maybe 2-3 years ago, my parents cleaned out their garage, and that bike had been collecting dust for 20 years, which is really sad. It shows you kids what your words can do. So anyway, went into the wilderness for a while, moved into high school, and I became sort of a skateboarder instead, a certain Birdman had influenced me, specifically a video game. And I was a skateboarder for a few years. Never any good at it, but skateboarding was my thing. Cycling, not so much. So anyway, we're going to do a time jump at this point, and we are going to leap into the future. We're going to go to my late teens, early 20s. So in my late teens, like a lot of people, but pretty seriously, the relationship with my parents had spiraled quite badly. We were having fights every afternoon. I was avoiding going home. I used to hang out at the local subway because I was scared of going home. My parents were never abusive. My parents were only ever good to me. They just wanted what was best in their opinion, and it clashed with what I as a teenager wanted. And so I started becoming angry and frustrated. I felt like I was a disappointment to my parents, but I also didn't want to be what my parents wanted me to be. I was raised in quite a conservative Christian family, and I moved away from the church at this point. And so I started feeling isolated. I was attending a Christian school at this time, and I didn't feel my values aligned. So I moved to a different school, found a bit of a place, was there for 2 years, got in a relationship with a girl who gave me a lot of self-worth. And then we separated at the same time that I left high school, and I lost a lot of the friends that I had from that relationship, and I lost a lot of that self-worth. And so I turned to drinking, I turned to partying, and the partying led to some pretty regular.
I like to party.
And obviously this is not a positive thing. Basically I was trying to kill myself. I was super depressed, and I did not care whether I made it out of each night. And so when I would go out, the fact that what I was doing was dangerous was an attraction instead of something that might scare someone off. I was admitted to the St. George Crisis Centre because I told my mum that I wanted to take my own life, and she recommended that I go there. I was in overnight, and then they set me free and hooked me up with a counsellor who I had a few conversations with. But what really turned it around was a specific moment in my 20th year where a friend of mine said he was cleaning up his uncle's garage, and he was wondering if I would help in exchange for an old bike that he had in the garage. I had nothing going on, and I said, sure. It was a piece of shit. And flat tyres, the tyres were literally from the 1980s. It was a 1980s Repco Monaco, and it was a mess. Tyres completely degraded, the seat was falling apart, but I managed to get it rideable. I'm pretty sure the gears were busted, or at least the front gears were, so I couldn't change from high to low. I rode it home, and it was just like back to being 10 again, and it was sick. And I rode it the next day, and I rode it the day after, and I rode it the day after that. I took it to the bike shop, I got it fixed. I was riding 10Ks, I was riding 20Ks. I then rode it to my girlfriend's in Doonside, which is 50 kilometres, which was monumental for me at the time. And I was hooked. I absolutely loved this bike. And so after a while, I said to my dad, I'd like to go and get a new bike. And my dad said, well, let's go to the local bike shop, which at the time was the Bike Shed Mortdale. And we went and had a look at a Krypton Argon 18 Krypton. And it was a weapon at the time. I think it was 10-speed Shimano 105, and I absolutely loved it. And okay. So another time jump to a few months later, and I had an issue with the bike, and this was in the dark ages, or what bike mechanics and bike shop owners would call the good old days, when they got a day off each week. And in Sydney, at least, that seemed to be a Sunday, because you could not find a bike mechanic on a Sunday, except for some small shop in Penshurst called Two Monkeys Cycling. So I brought my bike into Two Monkeys Cycling to get it looked at, and got chatting with the guys, and they said, hey, we've got a group ride that goes out every Saturday morning. There are a bunch of different groups that go, so there's a group for you. I bought a shop kit from them that day, bibs, shirt, not socks, still wearing anklets at this time. But anyway, showed up on the next Saturday with my underpants on underneath my bibs, of course, and off I went on my first ever group ride, and I was hooked. I was there the next week. I was there the week after. The week after that, I think they let slip that they do a Sunday ride as well. I was on the Sunday ride. Then they let me know there were Tuesday and Thursday rides. I was there every Tuesday and Thursday. I was riding Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to work, to and from, plus 4 group rides every week, averaging about 350 kilometers each week. I started racing, and what this did was meant smoking, drinking, partying, and then waking up for a bike ride was a non-starter. And I had to choose between one or the other. And I'm forever grateful that I chose cycling, because I genuinely believe that I would not have all of the gifts that I have in my life at the moment if that had gone a different direction. And there were points where it was tempting. It was hard to choose to wake up for a group ride and leave a work event at 9 o'clock instead of staying till 12 o'clock and being really hungover on the next day. But I feel like I chose well. So when people ask me why I'm so passionate about cycling, I think it comes down to 2 things. And the first one is what I talked about at the start, that 10-year-old cruising around the local neighborhood, just exploring. And it's the freedom and the exhilaration that comes with being on a bike as opposed to being in a car or being on a motorbike, which is great. There's something about putting out your own power and exploring at your own, on your own, using your own strength and your own fitness to just feel the wind in your hair. It's unreal, it's electric, and it takes you back to being a kid. And I reckon that's why a lot of middle-aged men end up going back to it. But the second one is, I genuinely think I would not be here if it wasn't for finding cycling. I really, really didn't want to be a part of this world anymore. And then I discovered bikes. And it didn't give me a purpose. It's not anything like that. It just made it so that I wanted to change my lifestyle. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm so grateful for everyone that's been a part of my cycling journey, because you've been a part of that. You've been part of making me want to be different. You've been part of me wanting to be better. And that's why I love cycling so much. So that's the video. I've tried to keep it short without erring away from too many details. If there are any questions that you would have about the journey, feel free to ask them in the comments. Otherwise, jump over to the Instagram if they're personal and flick me a DM. And I'm happy to chat about it. I'm pretty open about my mental health struggles. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it gave you a little bit of insight. And if you're going through anything similar, remember that you're not alone. Even the people that you see with happy faces, you know, they're often the ones that are doing it the toughest. In fact, there's a really good Norwich football advertisement that my brother linked me that goes through exactly that. So yeah, it's okay to not be okay, but you really should be doing something about it, and that's super important. Anyway, have a wonderful day, and yeah, get out riding. Boom.